Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday. That's New Comic Book Day, when mildly malodorous man babies go to their LCS, their local comic shop, where they stand around browsing all the stuff they're not going to buy, but are nevertheless going to complain about. And I used to be part of their number. I would go every Wednesday and I would look at the new releases, the floppies as they're called today, the individual issues. And there were times where Marvel or DC, the two big superhero comic book producers, had whole slates of things that I very much wanted to follow every month. I was there. I wasn't there just to stare at the crowd. I was there to buy issues and follow storylines. That has largely dropped off, especially since Marvel and DC are both now very much on board with reprint culture, with taking all of those individual floppy issues and bringing them together as uh, bound volumes with ISBNs that they can send to libraries and bookstores. There's a great back end there now that the comic book buying public is older and has some disposable income, and as a result, there's not the impetus anymore to hungrily grab the latest issues, except for the impetus of following a story if you irresistibly can't stand to wait. But back then, in decades and decades past, when I would feverishly go to the corner store to get comic books every week, there was no hint that that would happen. And if there had been, I might not have done it. I might have waited. As it is now, I do wait almost exclusively. I almost never go to the local comic shop to get weekly issues. I don't particularly. I have dipped my toe in. I don't particularly like any of the handling currently, the current storylines of virtually any of the current comics that I would otherwise get. Uh, Justice League right now is being written and drawn just really, really well, and I might have got that at the comic shop. I think the Justice League is new today, maybe next week, but it seemed like a slim thing to hang a whole visit on. Where there is no Legion of Superhero comic, for instance, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, are indecipherable to me. I've never been that big a fan of the X-Men. There is no Justice Society comic book ongoing now. The Batman storylines, the Superman storylines, not really doing it for me. So I actually skipped my LCS today. Now I check inventories online to see what's coming out any given Wednesday, and this particular Wednesday, aside from a couple of maybe Conan related titles, but I have unfortunately I missed a week or a couple of weeks with Age of Conan, Conan the Barbarian, Savage Sword of Conan, and Red Sonja. I missed a week with all of those, or more than 1 week, so that now I don't know where I stand with those issues. So I probably will just buy the collections of those as they come out. And aside from that, there wasn't anything. There wasn't also any anthology collection that I really particularly wanted this week. I think that's different next week. I think there's a rather expensive one next week that I might want, but we'll talk about that next week. But this week's failure felt extra ironic, extra poignant, because this is a big comic book week, one of the biggest comic book weeks in the lifespan of a lot of young comic book fans. This was the week of Avengers Endgame, the culmination of what was it, 20 Marvel movies, 10 years of movie going. There are plenty of comic book superhero fans who have literally grown up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe that started with Robert Downey Jr. in the first Iron Man movie. And Avengers Endgame brings all of that to a kind of conclusion in a massively epic way. Now, I have exercised freakish self-control here in this little book room, because down on the floor right there for weeks I have had the screener with effects for Avengers Endgame, and I made a point of not watching it until the thing was in theaters, so that I could be at least a little part of the huge excitement. Turns out the excitement is enormous, off the scales. The thing has entered history. I think it's the fourth largest grossing weekend of any movie in history. And I finally did watch the movie. In fact, I've watched it a few times, and it is brilliant. It is an amazing thing. It is 100% fan service. It is 100% a love letter to all of the people who have followed this universe across its development over all of those movies, from the first Iron Man movie. And when you think about that. That is an amazing, unprecedented thing to happen in movies. For any movie studio to do. That is utterly unprecedented. For them to be slowly and consciously building across many properties and across many directors and writers, slowly but consciously building one huge, relatively cohesive fictional universe. The closest thing that anyone has ever come before that was Star Wars, which doesn't count because for most of the time it was run by one person's vision, and also Star Trek. But you only have to glance at the different Star Trek movies to know that they're not cohesive at all. There's a couple that cohere together because they were made to be part one and part two of a storyline, but most of it is all over the map. But the Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't like that at all. It's an amazing accomplishment that this should happen at all in our lifetimes. The closest thing that I actually think it comes to is Peter Jackson filming all of the Lord of the Rings movies, the original trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, all at once, on a gamble of an artistic nature. Only this is incalculably vaster in terms of time and money and logistics. And I think it is pulled off amazingly so. That is the amazing thing about Avengers Endgame as a culmination of that cinematic universe, is that it was a success. We're never going to see anything like this again in our lifetimes. And not only that, but it's also daring. Because Avengers Endgame, I'm not going to give anything away in case you haven't managed to beat through the crowds and actually go to see it. But Avengers Endgame is very much what the title says. Ordinarily, in the old and cynical view of movie studios, the idea would be, well, if you have a cash cow like this, you don't kill it. You make it so that it can stay true forever. And Avengers Endgame very much does not do that. It is not only a culmination of the 20 movies that have gone before it, but it's also a jumping off into the unknown, which is admirable on the part of a movie studio to do. I mean, even if this thing makes $1 trillion and therefore imparts a certain amount of impunity to the studio to take some risks, even so, studios don't usually do that sort of thing. It's amazing on both those counts. And boy, oh boy, is it a satisfying movie. Boy, oh boy, is it ever. I'm not spoiling anything to tell you that it is a continuation of the previous Avengers movie, in which the Avengers square off against the mad titan Thanos, who was created in the 1970s mainly by Steve Englehart and an artist named Jim Starlin, as a power-mad dictator on Saturn's moon Titan, who he has a bit of a ramshackle history at the beginning, and has always been, since his very inception, overpowered, OP, which is a comic book phrase for when a character does things they shouldn't be able to do, has a level of power that they shouldn't actually have. The number one object of such a complaint in the comic book universe now, at least certain precincts of the comic book universe, is Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel. Fans have been complaining for years that she is badly overpowered, that she can do anything, and that's not cohesive with the character as she appears on paper. I don't really know about that, because the original incarnation of Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, had a very limited power set. She had a limited super strength, limited invulnerability, the ability to fly, and a limited precognitive ability. And that set of powers held true for a long time. It was not anything to write home about. Then she lost those powers. Then she got gigantic Silver Surfer cosmic level powers as a character called Binary. And then lost those powers, but maintained a vestige of them. And so her power levels have been all over the map in the comic books. You could easily make a case, continuity-wise, that for a Captain Marvel who is incredibly powerful, an A-lister in the Marvel universe. I think the main thing that vocal precinct is complaining about when they complain about her current power level in Marvel is that it isn't accompanied by a very pronounced personality. I don't think they'd mind much if they thought the character had any kind of three-dimensionality. But the reason I bring it up is because Captain Marvel is in Avengers Endgame. She's now firmly a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I bring it up also for another reason, because Thanos was obviously conceived by Jim Starlin early on as a world-beating big bad guy. So not Paste Pot Pete, not the wingless wizard, but a cosmic threat that could go toe-to-toe with what in the 1970s was a vogue of cosmic heroes in Marvel Comics. Captain Marvel, the previous Captain Marvel, Captain Marvel, a blonde male superhero who's sort of the current Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, is sort of a legacy inheritance of him, his mantle, but also the Silver Surfer and Adam Warlock. These characters had cosmic adventures, and the Thanos was obviously intended at one point to be a cosmic villain, and it was never really explained at the beginning why that would be so. He, for instance, came across the cosmic cube, known in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the Tesseract from the Avengers movie, that gave him, vast cosmic powers. But when not in contact with the cube, when not wearing the cube or using it as a weapon, Thanos should not have been able to stand toe-to-toe in combat with even Iron Man, to say nothing of Thor. Thor should have been able to mop the floor with him. On paper, if you look at the two of them, that should be true. And that becomes a very active consideration in Avengers Endgame, because Thor and Thanos face off twice in the movie. And one of those times, in both cases, Thanos is not cosmically superpowered at the moment, and should not be able to stand toe-to-toe with Thor and Iron Man, let alone either one of them, let alone both of them together. It's not something that you're going to hold against Avengers Endgame. It is such an incredibly winning movie that you're not going to care. But nevertheless, it's on my mind because of something that I want to show you. Because there were no new issues, nothing new to draw me to the comic shop today, I want to do a back issue comic segment here where I talk about an older issue. Because it's Avengers Endgame week, I chose one that stars the Avengers and Thanos. It's issue number 125 of the original run of the Avengers, with a great. It features Thanos, the Warlord of Titan, and it has a great John Romita Sr. cover. Look at that John Romita Sr. cover. So you have the Vision and the Scarlet Witch, Captain America, and Thor in an allegorical cover, of course, facing off against Thanos. This is not meant. This is just. The old style comic book covers could be allegorical. They could show you something that not only doesn't happen in the issue but couldn't happen, and this is one of those. And this is there was a big Shaggy Dog story that Steve Englehart and Roy Thomas had come up with about Thanos, the Thanos War, where Thanos wants to conquer the galaxy. In these issues, he has not yet achieved his singular purpose of wanting to kill people, of being a nihilist, of being comics' foremost nihilist. Later on, after this, he falls in love with the female personification of death and wants only to please her, and the way to do that is to eliminate half of all life in the universe. A motive that is transformed in Avengers Endgame and in the previous Avengers movie into him just wanting more room in the universe, more resources, where he doesn't want to wipe out people just to please death. Death does not appear in the movies. Instead, he wants to wipe them out to benefit the universe, because fewer people will mean more resources for everybody. In this new movie, in Avengers Endgame, he has a wonderful moment. Josh Brolin does a fantastic job as Thanos in both these movies. And he has, in this new movie, a wonderful moment where he realizes, I made a mistake. I did my famous Thanos snap and wiped out half of all living people in the universe. But what I should have done was wipe out everybody and start from scratch. I didn't do that. And I will next time. But in this issue, this came out in 1974. And in this issue, he is just bent on conquest. And he has amassed a massive fleet and a whole bunch of supervillains that are in his thrall. And he is also in possession of the cosmic cube. So he is beginning his path to being overpowered. And the plot line for Thanos War is a little bit ragged. Marvel would in the ensuing decades would get a lot better at multi-part storylines that cross from comic to comic. It'd be one thing if this had been only Steve Englehart only writing the Avengers. I think it would have held together a lot better. But instead, this pops over to Marvel Team Up and Captain Marvel's own comic book, and loses a bit of cohesion. You've got people who maybe aren't in as tight a contact with stories as they should be, and so things don't make as much sense. The Avengers in this issue have just finished with an adventure fighting the Zodiac, a Zodiac-themed criminal gang. When a young woman comes to Avengers Mansion, she has a story to tell about a world-conquering being called Thanos. At one point, very interestingly, considering all of the years that are going to come, Captain America says to her, "Who or what is that?" They've never heard of Thanos before, but they are quickly brought up to speed that Thanos is an intergalactic warlord who wants to conquer the universe and who wants to conquer Earth. And in this issue, this is written by Steve Englehart, it's drawn by John Buscema, and it's inked by Dave Cockrum, who would go on to fame as the penciler for the all-new, all-different X-Men. But he was also an inker, and he's a very different inker than the usual kind that Buscema usually got. He's a very tight inker, as you usually get when the inker is also an artist. He's very tight, very detailed. So the big flowing nature of Buscema's panel sequences is tightly controlled in here. Even more tightly controlled than what I consider to be one of the best inkers, Joe Sinnott, who Marvel ever employed. This is even more tightly controlled and textured than that. So that you have to look sometimes panel by panel in here to see John Buscema instead of Dave Cockrum. These discussion panels there, that is very much Dave Cockrum and not John Buscema, except in vaguest outline. And the Avengers team that learn of Thanos' plan to attack Earth, to send an invasion fleet to Earth, this is an interesting era in the Avengers. Of course, you have Captain America. He returns to the team in this issue. You have Iron Man. You have Thor. So you have Marvel's modern day Trinity. These three stalwarts. But you also have, in this issue and in many issues around here, you have Black Panther, who's done really well. Steve Englehart really does him well, and also the stars of the show, the only ones that are mentioned in the letters column of these issues, and the only ones that any of us at the time were thinking about. A love quartet. Steve Englehart actually dreamed up a love quartet and made it work and kept it going from issue to issue. There's the Vision that you will know from the movie. Doesn't quite look like that in the movies, but close enough. He's an android. And there's the Scarlet Witch who falls in love with him. They fall in love with each other. They are a couple. But then into the mix is thrown Mantis, who is not anything like the character in Guardians of the Galaxy. Instead, she is a young Korean woman who's an expert martial artist and who was trained by humans who were trained by the Kree, the same people that were the people of Captain Marvel. So she has an otherworldly element about her, and she's also alluring. And we meet her in company with the Swordsman, who's an old Avengers villain, who in the handling in this storyline in Steve Englehart's hands becomes a kind of loser. He is enthralled by Mantis, and they join the Avengers. The Swordsman and Mantis join the Avengers. The Swordsman is just a normal human being who's exceptionally good with his sword, and his sword has all sorts of technological gimmicks in it. But his personality comes to the fore in these issues because he is kind of grubby, kind of pathetic. He loses often. He is at one point captured and tortured by villains. That never happens in the Avengers or anywhere else. And he's also insecure in his love for Mantis. He's worried because Mantis seems to be taking a shine to the Vision, and she seems to be a little disdainful of him, of the Swordsman. She seems to think, you're kind of, she never actually says this, but you're kind of pathetic, you're kind of fallible. It works wonderfully. Englehart just writes the heck out of it. I love Quartet in the middle of the Avengers having cosmic adventures. It's just wonderful. And when they learn that Thanos has sent an invasion fleet to Earth, they marshal their resources, which involves 2 starships. The Zodiac gang had a starship of its own. They repurposed that for their own use, and the Black Panther pilots it alone. And then they have an Avengers Quinjet. But from previous cosmic adventures that they've had, they have learned not only to outfit the Quinjet for interstellar travel, but also to arm it with weapons, with energy weapons. So those 2 Avengers crafts take off from Earth to protect it. Once they learn what's going on, there's a neat little thing here. We get just one panel, vroom, where they vault into the skies in order to confront Thanos' fleet. And they do confront his fleet in near-Earth orbit, close enough so that debris from shot-down craft actually lands on Manhattan. But the point I want to make about this storyline, well, I'll get to the point. The story takes place in outer space. Thanos' fleet is composed of many, many ships. They go to war. Thor is able to fight them in space, just unencumbered because he's the god of thunder. In a later Thanos adventure, Thor and Iron Man both are equipped to fight in outer space. None of the other Avengers are. And at the heart of this fleet is a gigantic black space that is protected by a force field. The Black Panther notices it, and they assume, rightly, that something important is in the middle of that. See, his weapons can't penetrate the black space there. So what they do is send a team to go and penetrate the black force field individually. They need the ships to fight the invasion fleet. So they send a team composed of the Love Quartet. and at one point, Swordsman mouths off that, Mantis, he complains to the Vision who is leading the mission, saying, Mantis talks about you and it's not right. Who do you think you are? You're an android. and Mantis is amazed to learn that Vision talks about her, and we get this wonderful panel. She's talking to the Vision. The Vision is saying this is not the time for any of this, and the Scarlet Witch is in the background, and she's horrified. She's horrified to think that there might be some validity to this, that there might be an actual attraction on both parts between her man and Mantis, right in the middle of a space battle, and yet it works. And they go to this force field. The Scarlet Witch's hex ability allows them to penetrate it. They find a ship in the middle of it, which is projecting the field. And when they get on board the ship, they are attacked by a normal crowd of space aliens. Some great action sequences there where our team just mows them down, and in the process destroys a big device, which is called the Universal Language Equalizer. And the Vision has already commented that isn't it odd that all of these alien soldiers are speaking in English. And when they destroy the device, the Vision says, well, it's odd that it would be labeled in English, at which point Mantis says that she sees it in Korean. So it is a universal language translator, and they shut it off. And it's the only thing, of course, keeping the crews of these various vessels of the invasion fleet from turning on each other. They suddenly can't understand each other, and so they fight each other. And our quartet also turns off the force field, so that the whole invasion comes to nothing. The invasion fleet fights amongst itself, and the whole thing falls apart. And the Avengers come back home to Avengers Mansion in Manhattan, thinking that they have largely succeeded. Thor, for instance, says it's only a matter of time until all of us defeat this guy, whom they have never met. They haven't seen Thanos yet. Only Mantis is saying, I don't think so. I feel, this one feels that there is something else going on here, and that we haven't actually won the victory we think we have. The Scarlet Witch tends to agree with her, although they don't like to agree with each other. And of course, it's true. Thanos has only sacrificed his fleet in order to gain some tactical advantage in his own mind, and the plot line is going to continue. In fact, at one point at the very end of the issue, we see him hiding behind a chimney. Which is hardly conducive to, it hardly goes along with the gigantically epic Thanos that we see later on. But the point I want to make about this issue, I mean, it's great. It's a real fun issue. It's got everything. It's got Thor fighting in outer space. It's got team dynamics. It's got our quartet of slightly lower powered heroes getting a chance to cut loose on an alien vessel. And it's a nice step forward in this Thanos War storyline that some of us were following from comic to comic. Even if we didn't buy Captain Marvel, we would still do that in order to get the chapter involved. Now that's commonplace. Look at, for instance, in Marvel Comics now, the War of the Realms is sprawling across 25 different titles, and you need to buy them all. This was the infancy of that. But one of the things I want to point out about this is the amazing visuals. You've seen some of them, the good comic book stuff, but there's a spread when the Avengers 2 vessels leave Earth and encounter Thanos' fleet for the first time. We get a 2-page spread that, again, John Buscema drew this issue, but this 2-page spread has Dave Cockrum all over it. I don't think Buscema would have had much interest in doing this. Getting him to draw page after page of Mantis looking really alluring, yes, absolutely. But this, look at that. Just look at that. The 2 vessels in the foreground are our heroes. And they are encountering, with the sun as the background, they are encountering. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, of course, if they're fighting in the orbit of the sun, then no wreckage is going to fall on Manhattan. But let's not quibble. Look at that 2-page spread. That is incredible. With the solar flares erupting off the sun and the sheer perspective of it, that's just amazing. Never mind that this couldn't be anything. Never mind that they wouldn't be fighting around in the coronosphere of the sun if they were fighting just launched from Earth. Never mind any of that. That is just an amazing visual. And I want to point out, this was before Star Wars. This was before anything of the kind. The closest that comic book fans could get to that kind of visual anywhere outside of comics was the occasional space opera cover of a science fiction paperback. Other than that, you just didn't get cosmic stuff like this at all anywhere else except in comics. And that's a little poignant for me now to realize that when I was rereading this issue, because, of course, comics have been totally overshadowed by the movies. Special effects in movies now, when you watch Avengers Endgame now, you are seeing things that are every bit as effective in terms of your eye as any special effect that could be done in a comic book. It's kind of amazing. If it hadn't blown me away, I love the movie. Absolutely loved it. I have not, I admit, been all that big a fan of Tony Stark's Iron Man, but it's his movie, and it's amazing. Just amazing. The last hour of Avengers Endgame is the best thing Marvel's ever done in the cinematic universe. But even so, I felt a little pang because I was watching things that were totally convincing. And if you're old enough, you will remember when TV and movie special effects were not convincing. You knew what they were going for, but they weren't there, and you had to make up the difference. Now you don't have to do that. You can sit in a movie theater and see a comic book brought to life totally convincingly, so that every detail of it looks real. That kind of special effects stuff happened in our lifetime. That did not exist when this came out. Nothing even close to it existed when this came out. With the result that this is where you went for that. This is where you went for Avengers Endgame. This was the Avengers Endgame of its day, where you would be blown away. I remember buying this issue on the spinner rack, the metal spinner rack at the dry goods store. And when I got to that 2-page spread, I stared at it for probably a good half hour, just daydreaming about it. Because we had not seen visuals like that at all. We had a couple more years to wait before they would enter into movies in any way and then become commonplace. So I wanted to use Avengers 125 as my back issue feature today because it's all about Avengers and Thanos. And a lot of the characters in this issue are ones that we have seen transformed into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Granted, they have never done the Swordsman. And the Mantis they did is very different from the one that was dreamt up in these comic books. But all the rest of these characters, Black Panther, Scarlet Witch, the Vision, Thor, Iron Man, Captain America, they're all part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe now. This has been totally superseded by that. And that's kind of, it's wonderful in a way, also a little bittersweet, but I'll live with that. I naturally had to gravitate towards this issue because Avengers Endgame is the comic book event of the week. And of course, allow me to recommend it to you as well. If you have not gone to see it, you should go to see it. It's amazing. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.